The autumn leaves crunched under Officer Martinez's boots as he walked through the prison yard during his evening rounds. He had been working at Riverside Correctional Facility for 12 years, and in all that time, he had never seen anything quite like what was happening in Cell Block D. Word had spread quickly through the guards about inmate 4472, an elderly man named Thomas Hartwell who had been serving a life sentence for 23 years. Thomas was dying. The prison doctor had been clear about that 3 weeks ago when the test results came back. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, maybe 2 months left if he was lucky. The old man had taken the news with a quiet dignity that surprised everyone, including Martinez. Most inmates would have raged, cried, or demanded appeals. Thomas just nodded and asked if he could write a letter. But it wasn't the letter that had everyone talking. It was what Thomas had asked for afterward, during his meeting with the prison chaplain. Father Mackenzie had come to Martinez afterward, his usually steady hands shaking as he held a piece of paper. "He wants to see his dog," Father Mackenzie had said, his voice barely above a whisper. "A German shepherd named Max says it's his final wish." Martinez had laughed at first. Inmates made all sorts of crazy requests when they were facing death. He had heard it all before. Some wanted to see family members who had disowned them decades ago. Others wanted expensive last meals or to meet celebrities. But a dog? That was a new one. The request had made its way up the chain of command, causing quite a stir. Warden Johnson had called it ridiculous. The state prison system didn't allow pet visits, and they certainly weren't going to start making exceptions for dying murderers. Because that's what Thomas Hartwell was, after all. He had killed a man during a robbery gone wrong back in 2001. The victim had been a father of 3, just trying to protect his small grocery store. But something about Thomas's request stuck with Martinez. Maybe it was the way the old man's eyes had lit up when he talked about Max. Or maybe it was how he had described the dog in such vivid detail, as if he could see him right there in his cell. Max was 8 years old now, Thomas had said, with a slight limp in his left hind leg from when he got hit by a car as a puppy. He had one ear that flopped over more than the other, and a white patch on his chest shaped like a star. Martinez had done some checking on his own time. He wasn't sure why, but something about the whole situation bothered him. He discovered that Thomas had been telling the truth about Max. The dog was real, and he was living with Thomas's sister, Margaret, in a small town about 2 hours away from the prison. Margaret was 72 years old and had been taking care of Max since her brother's incarceration. What Martinez found out next changed everything. Through his research, he learned that Thomas hadn't always been a criminal. Before the robbery, he had been a decorated Army veteran who served 2 tours in Afghanistan. He had worked as a security guard and lived alone with Max, who had been his service dog for PTSD. The robbery had happened during a particularly dark period in Thomas's life when he had been struggling with addiction and mental health issues following his military service. The more Martinez dug, the more complex the story became. Thomas had never denied his guilt. He had pleaded guilty immediately and had spent his 23 years in prison without a single disciplinary action. He had earned his GED, completed several vocational programs, and had even started a program to train service dogs for other veterans before budget cuts eliminated it. But none of that mattered to the prison administration. Rules were rules, and they existed for good reasons. Allowing a dog into the prison would set a dangerous precedent. What would happen if other inmates started demanding to see their pets? The security risks alone were enormous. Martinez found himself thinking about Thomas more and more as the days passed. During his rounds, he would stop by the old man's cell and find him sitting on his narrow bunk, staring at a worn photograph. The picture showed a younger Thomas in military fatigues, kneeling next to a beautiful German shepherd with intelligent brown eyes and alert, pointed ears. "That's him," Thomas would say whenever he caught Martinez looking. "That's my boy Max. Saved my life more times than I can count over in Afghanistan. Kept me sane when I came back home too. If it wasn't for my own stupidity, we'd still be together." The old man's voice would crack when he talked about Max, and Martinez could see the genuine love and regret in his eyes. This wasn't just about seeing a pet before he died. This was about saying goodbye to the one being who had shown him unconditional love. The one relationship he hadn't managed to destroy with his mistakes. As Thomas grew weaker, spending more time in the medical ward, Martinez made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He couldn't stop thinking about the old man dying alone, with his greatest regret being that he never got to say goodbye to the dog who had been his closest companion. There had to be a way to make this happen, even if it meant bending some rules. Martinez had no idea that his decision to help would set in motion a series of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about justice, redemption, and the power of unconditional love. The guard who had seen it all in his 12 years at Riverside was about to witness something that would shake him to his very core. Thursday evening arrived with an unusual tension in the air at Riverside Correctional Facility. Martinez had been on edge all day, checking his watch every few minutes and running through the plan in his head. At 6:30, he received a text message from Margaret that simply said, "On our way." His hands trembled slightly as he read it. Officer Chen had positioned herself at the main security desk, engaging the head guard in conversation about scheduling changes for the following week. Martinez watched from across the lobby as she played her part perfectly, keeping the man's attention focused away from the security monitors that showed the service entrance. At exactly 7 o'clock, Martinez made his way through the service corridors toward the east entrance. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure other people could hear it. As he approached the door, he could see Margaret's old blue sedan parked behind the maintenance building just as planned. When he opened the service door, Margaret was standing there with Max on a leash. Martinez's breath caught in his throat. The German Shepherd was even more beautiful than the photograph had suggested. Despite his age and the slight limp, Max carried himself with dignity and intelligence. His coat was well-groomed, and his eyes were alert and curious as he took in his surroundings. "He's been excited all day," Margaret whispered as she handed Martinez the leash. "It's like he knows something special is happening." Martinez knelt down and let Max sniff his hand. The dog's tail wagged slowly, and he seemed to accept the strange man in the uniform. Margaret had brought a small bag with some of Max's favorite treats and a worn tennis ball that she said Thomas had given the dog years ago. "Take care of them both," Margaret said, tears visible in her eyes. "And thank you for doing this. You have no idea what this means." Martinez led Max through the service corridors, his heart racing with every step. The dog followed calmly, his nails clicking softly on the concrete floor. They encountered only one janitor along the way who looked surprised but said nothing. Martinez hoped the man would keep quiet about what he had seen. The consultation room in the medical ward was small and sterile, with fluorescent lighting and a single table with 2 chairs. Martinez brought Max inside and closed the door, then went to find Dr. Patricia Wong, the evening medical supervisor. Dr. Wong had been working at the prison for 8 years and had seen Thomas's condition deteriorate rapidly over the past month. When Martinez explained what he was trying to do, her first instinct was to refuse. The liability issues were enormous, and bringing an animal into the medical ward violated numerous health and safety regulations. But Dr. Wong had also spent enough time with dying patients to understand the importance of final moments. She had seen how much peace people could find in small gestures of kindness and closure. After a long pause, she agreed to help, but only under strict conditions. "I'll bring him to the consultation room for 15 minutes, she said. "That's all I can do. If anyone asks questions later, I'll say we were conducting a psychological evaluation. But if this goes wrong, I never had this conversation with you." Martinez returned to the consultation room to wait with Max. The dog had settled down on the floor next to the door, as if he understood he needed to be quiet. His ears were alert, turning toward every sound in the hallway. Martinez wondered if Max could somehow sense that Thomas was nearby. At 7:20, Dr. Wong appeared at the door with Thomas in a wheelchair. The old man was wearing his standard prison uniform and a thin blanket across his lap. He looked even more frail than usual, but his eyes were alert and focused. When Thomas saw Max, the change in his face was immediate and dramatic. His eyes widened, and he made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. For a moment, Martinez thought the old man might have had a heart attack. "Max?" Thomas whispered, his voice barely audible. "Is that really you, boy?" The dog's reaction was equally dramatic. Max's head snapped up at the sound of Thomas's voice, and his entire body began to tremble with excitement. He stood up slowly, his tail wagging so hard his whole back end was moving. The dog took a tentative step forward, then another, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. "Come here, boy," Thomas said, reaching out with a shaking hand. "Come to Daddy." Max crossed the room in 3 quick steps despite his limp and immediately put his head in Thomas's lap. The old man's hands buried themselves in the dog's thick fur, and both of them seemed to be shaking with emotion. What happened next left Martinez struggling to maintain his composure. Thomas began to sob, deep wrenching sounds that came from somewhere deep in his chest. His hands moved over Max's head and ears, touching the dog as if he needed to confirm that this moment was real. "I'm so sorry, boy," Thomas whispered through his tears. "I'm so sorry I left you. I'm so sorry I was such a fool." Max seemed to understand every word. The dog pressed closer to Thomas, his own body trembling with what could only be described as joy. He began licking Thomas's face and hands, his tail never stopping its excited wagging. Dr. Wong and Martinez stood near the door, both of them visibly moved by what they were witnessing. This wasn't just a reunion between a man and his pet. This was something much deeper, something that spoke to the fundamental human need for connection and forgiveness. Thomas began talking to Max in a soft, continuous stream of words. He told the dog about prison, about the mistakes he had made, about how much he had missed him every single day for 23 years. He talked about the dreams he'd had where they were young again, running through fields together. Max listened to every word, his intelligent eyes never leaving Thomas's face. Occasionally the dog would whine softly or lick Thomas's hand as if offering comfort and understanding. "You're such a good boy," Thomas said, his voice stronger now. "You always were the best boy. I hope you know how much I love you. I hope you know that leaving you was the hardest part of everything that happened." As the minutes passed, both Thomas and Max seemed to relax into the moment. The initial overwhelming emotion gave way to a quieter, deeper connection. Thomas pulled out the worn tennis ball that Margaret had sent and held it up. Max's eyes immediately focused on it, and for a moment, years seemed to fall away from both of them. Martinez checked his watch and realized they had been in the room for 12 minutes. They had 3 minutes left, and already he could hear increased activity in the hallway as the evening medical routines continued. But looking at Thomas and Max together, seeing the peace that had settled over both of them, Martinez knew that this moment was already worth every risk they had taken. Something healing was happening in that small, sterile room. Something that went beyond rules and regulations and spoke to the deepest parts of what it means to be human. Martinez spent the next 3 days planning something that could cost him his job, his pension, and possibly even land him in legal trouble. But every time he walked past Thomas's cell and saw the old man growing weaker, clutching that faded photograph, he knew he had to try. The first step was contacting Margaret Hartwell. Finding her phone number had been easy enough through public records, but making the call was one of the hardest things Martinez had ever done. How do you explain to a 72-year-old woman that her dying brother's last wish is to see his dog, and you're thinking about breaking prison regulations to make it happen? Margaret's voice was gentle but tired when she answered the phone. Martinez identified himself as a corrections officer and explained the situation as carefully as he could. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Max misses him," Margaret finally said, her voice thick with emotion. "Every night that dog sits by the window looking down the road, like he's still waiting for Tommy to come home. It's been 23 years and he still waits." She told Martinez that Max was indeed 8 years old now, and yes, he did have a slight limp from an old injury. The veterinarian had said the dog was in good health otherwise, but Margaret had noticed he seemed sadder as he got older, as if he understood that something was missing from his life. "I never brought Max to visit because the prison said no pets allowed," Margaret explained. "But I've kept every letter Tommy ever sent asking about him. The man loves that dog more than anything in this world. If there's a way to bring them together one last time, I'll drive through a hurricane to make it happen." Martinez felt a weight settle in his chest. Margaret's willingness to help made his plan feel more real and more dangerous. He explained that he couldn't promise anything, and that if they were caught, there could be serious consequences for everyone involved. Margaret didn't hesitate. "Officer Martinez," she said firmly, "my brother made a terrible mistake and he's paid for it with half his life, but he's still my little brother, and if this is his last wish, then I'm going to do everything in my power to grant it." The next challenge was logistics. Martinez couldn't just walk a German shepherd through the front gates of Riverside Correctional Facility. The security checkpoints, metal detectors, and surveillance cameras would make that impossible. But Martinez had been working there for 12 years, and he knew the facility's routines and blind spots better than almost anyone. There was a service entrance on the east side of the building that was used for deliveries and maintenance. During the evening shift change at 7 o'clock, there was usually a 15-minute window when that area was less monitored. The guards were focused on the main entrances and exits as the day shift left and the night shift arrived. Martinez also knew that Thomas was scheduled for another round of medical tests on Thursday evening. The medical ward was located near the service entrance, and there was a small consultation room that was sometimes used for private meetings with chaplains or lawyers. If Martinez could get Max into that room, and if he could convince the medical staff to bring Thomas there for a consultation, they might have a chance. But first, he needed help from someone on the inside. Officer Sarah Chen had been Martinez's partner on evening rounds for the past 2 years. She was young, idealistic, and had joined the corrections department because she believed in rehabilitation and second chances. If anyone would understand what Martinez was trying to do, it would be her. When Martinez approached Chen with his plan, her first reaction was exactly what he expected. She thought he had lost his mind. The risks were enormous, and if they were caught, both of their careers would be over. They could face criminal charges for violating security protocols. The liability issues alone were staggering, but Chen had also noticed the change in Thomas over the past few weeks. She had seen how the old man's face lit up whenever anyone mentioned Max, and how he had started giving away his few possessions to other inmates, keeping only that treasured photograph. She had watched him grow weaker each day, and she had heard him whisper Max's name in his sleep during her rounds. "This is insane," Chen said after Martinez finished explaining his plan. "But if we're going to do this, we need to do it right. One mistake and we're all finished." Chen's agreement gave Martinez the confidence he needed to move forward. Together they refined the plan and identified the specific time window when they could make it work. Thursday evening, during the shift change, Margaret would bring Max to the service entrance. Chen would create a distraction at the main security desk while Martinez escorted the dog through the service corridors to the medical consultation room. They would have maybe 20 minutes before someone noticed what was happening. The plan required precise timing and a lot of luck. They would need the medical staff to cooperate, at least partially. They would need Thomas to be well enough to make the trip to the consultation room. And they would need Max to remain calm in an unfamiliar and potentially frightening environment. Martinez called Margaret back to arrange the details. She would drive up from her small town with Max on Thursday evening, arriving at exactly 7 o'clock. She would park behind the maintenance building and wait for Martinez's signal. If anything went wrong, she would drive away immediately and pretend the whole thing never happened. On Wednesday night, Martinez barely slept. He kept running through the plan in his mind, identifying potential problems and trying to think of solutions. What if Thomas was too weak to leave the medical ward? What if Max became aggressive or frightened? What if another guard discovered them? But every time doubt crept in, Martinez remembered the look in Thomas's eyes when he talked about Max. This wasn't just about a dying man's wish to see his pet. This was about redemption, forgiveness, and the possibility that even someone who had made terrible mistakes could still experience love and grace in their final moments. Thursday morning arrived gray and overcast, matching Martinez's mood. As he got ready for work, he wondered if he was about to make the biggest mistake of his career. But when he arrived at the prison and saw Thomas being wheeled back from another medical appointment, looking frailer than ever, Martinez knew there was no turning back. The plan was in motion, and in just a few hours, something extraordinary was either going to happen or everything was going to fall apart. The 15 minutes passed far too quickly. Dr. Wong had already given Martinez 2 warning signals, and the sounds of normal medical ward activity were increasing in the hallway outside. But separating Thomas and Max proved to be much harder than anyone had anticipated. When Martinez gently touched Thomas's shoulder to indicate their time was up, the old man's face crumpled with fresh anguish. He buried his face in Max's fur one more time, breathing in the familiar scent that had comforted him through countless difficult nights years ago. "I have to go now, boy," Thomas whispered, his voice breaking. "But I want you to know that you're the best thing that ever happened to me. You be good for Aunt Margaret, okay? You take care of her like you took care of me." Max seemed to sense that something was ending. The dog whined softly and pressed even closer to Thomas, as if trying to prevent the inevitable separation. His tail had stopped wagging, and his intelligent eyes moved between Thomas and the door with what looked like worry. Dr. Wong stepped forward to help wheel Thomas back to the medical ward, but the old man held up a trembling hand to stop her. He had one more thing he needed to do. Reaching into his pocket, Thomas pulled out something that made Martinez's eyes fill with tears. It was a small metal dog tag, old and tarnished, that he had somehow managed to keep throughout his 23 years in prison. The tag bore Max's name and Thomas's old address from before his incarceration. "This belongs to you, boy," Thomas said, fastening the tag to Max's collar with shaking fingers. "I kept it all these years because it was the only piece of home I had left. But you should have it back now." The simple gesture seemed to break something inside everyone in the room. Dr. Wong turned away to wipe her eyes, and Martinez had to swallow hard to maintain his composure. Even Max seemed to understand the significance of the moment, sitting perfectly still as Thomas attached the tag. As Dr. Wong finally began to wheel Thomas toward the door, Max tried to follow. The dog pulled against Martinez's gentle hold on his leash, whining and looking back at Thomas with confused, pleading eyes. The sound was heartbreaking. "Stay, Max," Thomas called softly. "Stay, good boy. It's okay." The command came naturally to both of them, a reminder of years of training and bonding that prison walls could never erase. Max reluctantly stopped pulling, but his eyes never left Thomas until the wheelchair disappeared around the corner. Martinez stood alone with Max in the consultation room, both of them emotionally drained from what they had just witnessed. The dog sat by the door, occasionally whining softly and looking in the direction Thomas had gone. It was clear that Max understood something important had just ended. Getting Max back out of the prison proved to be even more challenging than bringing him in. The dog seemed reluctant to leave, as if he instinctively knew this might be his last chance to find Thomas. Martinez had to coax him through the corridors with treats and gentle encouragement. When they reached the service entrance, Margaret was waiting anxiously by her car. One look at Martinez's face told her everything she needed to know about how the reunion had gone. "Was it worth it?" she asked as she took Max's leash. Martinez nodded, unable to trust his voice. Margaret knelt down and hugged Max, who seemed subdued but calmer than when he had arrived. "Tommy's at peace now, isn't he?" she said to the dog. "You both got to say goodbye." As Martinez watched Margaret and Max drive away into the darkness, he felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that they hadn't been caught, satisfaction that they had accomplished something meaningful, but also a deep sadness knowing that Thomas was now facing his final weeks without even the hope of seeing Max again. When Martinez returned to his duties, Officer Chen was waiting for him with anxious eyes. She had managed to keep the security desk distracted during the crucial window, but the strain of the deception was written all over her face. "How did it go?" she whispered. "It was incredible," Martinez replied, "but I don't think I've ever seen anything sadder at the same time." Over the next few days, the change in Thomas was remarkable. Despite his worsening physical condition, he seemed more at peace than anyone had seen him since his diagnosis. He talked openly with other inmates about Max, sharing stories from their years together. He even began working on a letter to Margaret, thanking her for taking such good care of his dog. Dr. Wong reported that Thomas's pain seemed more manageable, and he was sleeping better than he had in weeks. The 15 minutes with Max had given him something that all the medical treatments and counseling sessions couldn't provide: closure and the knowledge that love could survive even the worst mistakes. But their secret didn't stay hidden for long. 3 days after the reunion, Warden Johnson called Martinez into his office. The janitor who had seen Martinez with Max had eventually reported what he had witnessed, and a review of the security footage had confirmed the breach. Martinez sat across from the warden's desk, knowing that his career was likely over. Warden Johnson was a by-the-book administrator who had built his reputation on running a tight, secure facility. The idea that one of his officers had smuggled a dog into the prison would be seen as an unacceptable security violation. "Officer Martinez," the warden began, his voice stern and controlled, "I understand you have something to explain to me about events that occurred last Thursday evening." Martinez took a deep breath and told the truth. He explained about Thomas's final wish, about Margaret and Max, about the careful planning that had gone into those 15 minutes in the consultation room. He didn't try to justify what he had done or make excuses. He simply told the story and waited for the consequences. Warden Johnson listened without interruption, his face revealing nothing. When Martinez finished, there was a long silence in the office. "Do you understand?" the warden finally said. "That what you did violated approximately 12 different security protocols? Do you realize that you put this entire facility at risk? Do you have any idea what could have happened if that dog had attacked someone, or if other inmates had seen what was happening?" Martinez nodded. He understood all of that, and he was prepared to face whatever punishment the warden deemed appropriate. But what Warden Johnson said next would surprise everyone involved and set in motion events that would change Riverside Correctional Facility forever. Warden Johnson leaned back in his chair and studied Martinez for a long moment. The silence in the office stretched until Martinez was certain he was about to be fired, arrested, or both. When the warden finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before. "Officer Martinez, I've been running correctional facilities for 28 years. In that time, I've seen just about everything you can imagine. Violence, corruption, escapes, riots. I've had to make decisions that kept me awake at night, wondering if I was doing the right thing or just following procedures." The warden stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the prison yard where inmates were returning from their evening activities. "But in all those years, I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like what happened in that consultation room. Dr. Wong came to see me yesterday and told me about the change in Thomas Hartwell. She said it was like watching a man find peace before dying." Martinez remained silent, unsure where this conversation was heading. "The truth is," Warden Johnson continued, "Thomas Hartwell has been one of our model inmates for over 2 decades. No disciplinary actions, stellar participation in programs, mentorship of younger inmates. If anyone deserved a moment of grace in their final weeks, it was probably him." The warden turned back to face Martinez. "What you did was wrong according to every regulation we have. But sometimes, Officer Martinez, the right thing and the legal thing aren't the same thing." Martinez felt his breath catch in his throat. This wasn't the conversation he had expected. "I'm not going to fire you," the warden said, "but I am going to make you responsible for something that I should have thought of myself. I want you to research the possibility of implementing a compassionate visitation program here at Riverside, something official with proper protocols and safeguards that would allow dying inmates to have meaningful final visits with family members who might not otherwise be permitted." The assignment was both a punishment and an opportunity. Martinez threw himself into the research, spending his off hours studying programs at other facilities and drafting proposals for how such a system might work at Riverside. Meanwhile, Thomas's condition continued to deteriorate. But the peace that had settled over him after seeing Max remained. Other inmates began to seek him out for advice and comfort, drawn by the calm acceptance he had found. Even some of the guards noticed the difference and started treating him with a new level of respect. 2 weeks after the reunion with Max, Thomas asked to speak with Martinez privately. When the officer arrived at his cell, Thomas was sitting on his bunk with a stack of letters he had been writing. "I wanted to thank you," Thomas said simply. "What you did for me, what you risked, it means more than you'll ever know." He handed Martinez one of the letters, addressed to the warden. "I wrote this for you to give to Warden Johnson when the time comes. I wanted him to know that what you did wasn't just about breaking rules. It was about remembering that even people like me are still human beings who deserve a chance at redemption." The letter was eloquent and moving, describing not just Thomas's gratitude for seeing Max, but his deep regret for the choices that had led him to prison, and his hope that other inmates might someday benefit from the kind of compassion Martinez had shown. 3 days later, Thomas Hartwell died peacefully in his sleep. Dr. Wong said it was one of the most peaceful deaths she had witnessed in her years at the prison medical ward. His final words, according to the night nurse, were about Max and how good it had been to see his good boy one more time. Margaret came to collect Thomas's few belongings, and she brought Max with her. The dog seemed subdued but no longer carried the anxious energy he had shown for years. It was as if the reunion had given him closure too. "Thank you," Margaret told Martinez as they stood in the prison parking lot. "Tommy died knowing he was loved, and that made all the difference." She handed Martinez a small package. Inside was the worn tennis ball that Max had carried for years, along with a note from Thomas asking that it be given to Martinez as a reminder that small acts of kindness could change everything. 6 months later, Riverside Correctional Facility officially launched its Compassionate Visitation Program, based largely on Martinez's research and recommendations. The program allowed dying inmates to have special visits with immediate family members, including in some cases beloved pets, under carefully controlled circumstances. Warden Johnson announced the program at a staff meeting, reading portions of Thomas Hartwell's letter and explaining how one officer's decision to bend the rules had opened everyone's eyes to gaps in their system's humanity. Sometimes, the warden said, it takes someone willing to risk everything to remind the rest of us what we're really supposed to be doing here. Officer Chen was promoted to supervise the new program, and Dr. Wong developed medical protocols to ensure that compassionate visits could happen safely and appropriately. The program became a model for other facilities across the state. Martinez kept the tennis ball on his desk as a reminder of that Thursday evening when everything changed. Whenever new officers joined the facility, he would tell them about Thomas and Max in the 15 minutes that taught him the difference between following rules and serving justice. The story spread throughout the corrections community and eventually reached national media attention. Martinez was invited to speak at conferences about the importance of maintaining humanity within the prison system. He always ended his presentations with the same message. We are responsible for keeping dangerous people away from society, he would say. But we are also responsible for remembering that even the worst among us are still human beings. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is help someone find peace before they die, even if it means bending a few rules along the way. Years later, when Martinez retired from the corrections department, he received hundreds of letters from inmates, families, and fellow officers whose lives had been touched by the Compassionate Visitation Program. But the letter he treasured most was a simple note from Margaret, telling him that Max had lived to be 12 years old and had died peacefully in his sleep, still wearing the old dog tag that Thomas had returned to him during their final reunion. The program that started with one guard's decision to help a dying man see his beloved dog had grown into something much larger. It had become a reminder that justice without mercy is just cruelty, and that sometimes the most profound changes begin with the smallest acts of human kindness. Martinez often wondered what would have happened if he had simply followed the rules that Thursday evening. Thomas would have died without seeing Max. The prison would have continued operating exactly as it always had, and no one would have learned anything about the power of compassion in the darkest places. Instead, one German shepherd and 15 minutes in a consultation room had changed everything, proving that love and redemption could exist even within the walls of a maximum security prison.